diagnose. The first thing you're going to be faced with is an error history log. The way that this error history log reads is you have system information. This is kind of a description of what's going on, and then you have the device where it's originating from. There's a number. That number actually corresponds to a list of numbers in the service manual. And then there's a count. So the count is how many times an error occurred after a boot up. So if you come in here and you see like an auto balance C error, for example, but you see it's happened like 5 times after a boot up, that's a really good indicator that there's a serious problem, that there's a hardware failure on your microscope. But if you see like this, where there's a ton of single time errors, usually that's an initialization error, or in this instance you have a lot of auto balance errors. That's when they did the auto balance, you got that error to post. I usually will cycle through and I'm looking for very specific things. I'm looking for things, major failures. Auto balance errors, you'll see, I'll address that here in a minute. But this one says like Glow 800 not found. There's some serious errors, and there's something that says MDC error. So MDC is the master device controller. It's a board that sits inside this control unit. They do fail, and that's what communicates to all the hardware. So any sort of MDC errors, what you need to do is get on the phone with Virgil or Mitch and have a conversation with them. This is an opportunity for you to get kind of educated on what each of these mean, and get educated on what's important to look at and what's not important. These systems have a lot of chatter, so there's a lot of information that maybe is not really all that important. But you're not going to know that until you have that conversation with them. And typically what I'll do is I will give them the number that's listed, and you can expand this column so you can see the full number, so OX319. And I'll tell them that, and then they can look in the service manual and tell me, hey, it's got a little bit more detailed information as to what the failure is. Once I've kind of addressed all that and I made sure I've documented what's on there, and I'm not documenting on the service report, but I'm taking pictures of it, so that way when I have a conversation with Virgil or Mitch, I'm giving them apples to apples comparison of what I saw here. Once I've gone through there, and it's whether the errors are significant or not significant, I'll clear this. So every PM, you need to clear that out. I also clear this at this point because at some point what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to do some service adjustments here, then I'm going to power down the unit and turn it back on and see if we get any new errors to post. So now that it's clear, what I'll do is, we've already talked about lamp history, it's the next tab over. We have motor service. On the newer systems, there is not an all motors, oh yes there is, I take that back. So I cycle through to all motors. On the older systems, there's a test and adjust. I'll do adjust first. It'll go through an adjustment, it'll cycle through all the motors, and then I'll do a test after that. And all I'm really looking for is to get green checks. So in this instance, I'll do the test. It actually runs through its paces and tests the various motors that are on the system. I let it do that. So right now, Iris motor is fine, Zoom motor is fine. And I think the last to hit us is going to be the focus motor. So once that's done, I will then go to other tests. We'll go there now while it's still. So on the newer systems, each of these have to be tested individually. So I just test them. So filter wheel position 1. Making sure that actually, yes, so it tests and checks out, gives me a green arrow. Then I go to filter position 2. So right now what it's doing is cycling through the filters and light source for fluorescence. Position 3, test it. 4, just keep cycling through. There's one area that we are not going to do out of these choices. I'll go over those in a minute. So this may seem tedious, but it's really important. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to leverage your time on the PM to not have to get calls midway through the year unexpectedly that's going to derail your week. You want to be able to get out in front of any possible failures now, so that way you can address them, getting added to the service report now. get them replaced if it needs to get replaced. So that way you're not getting unexpected calls later. Do the Downey speed spot test. So there's two lux meter choices. So lux meter calibration, you're not going to touch that. That's only if there's something that's failed in the lux meter over there. So make sure nobody's ever testing or calibrating the lux meter unless it's something that the office has told you to do. Any sort of information that typically says calibrate, just wait on that. But you can do a lux meter test. So if we do the lux meter test, it checks out and it says that it's calibrated. If it's not calibrated, this is where you're going to find out, and that's when you would request a lux meter kit from the office. They would send it out, and then you could do the calibration. Okay, so you've done the other tests. Check switches. So if it's got a foot pedal, I'll check the switches on the foot pedal. When you are doing this test, no functions should be happening at the head. It will just be lighting up here at the stand side, or this diagram. So I cycle through to the left handle. And then I come over to the left handle, I check every single button. And I'm wanting to see a tested dialog box on all of those. Usually on the hand grips, if there's a failure, it's going to be a total failure. You'll have, none of the functions will work or multiple functions will be missing. But it is worthwhile to test this every single time. This gives you an opportunity to see if the buttons are working. So then I cycle to the right hand grip, same deal. I just go through each one of those buttons and the XY, making sure that it actually tests. And if it tests, perfect, we're done. So that stage, I'll go back to the menu and I'll power down. So I power down, let it stay off for about 30 seconds to a minute. And I use that as an opportunity to recycle the power and see if any new errors post.